Today I take everything from you. He smiled like the ending was already written. But what he didn't know.
My husband leaned in close inside the cold courthouse hallway and whispered, "Today, I take everything from you." His smile was calm, confident, final, like the ending had already been signed and stamped in his favor. People around us saw a broken woman, quiet, tired, defeated. What they didn't see was the truth hidden behind my silence. Because while he believed he was taking my life apart, I had already put the numbers together. And with every calculation, his victory was quietly turning into a nightmare. Laura was never loud. She didn't command rooms or fight for the last word. She listened. She observed. She worked. While Kevin chased titles and applause, Laura managed the life they built behind the scenes. Bills were paid before reminders arrived. Investments were adjusted before markets shifted. Problems disappeared quietly, so quietly that Kevin began to believe they never existed at all. To him, her silence meant weakness. At dinner parties, Kevin spoke for her. "She just helps with the numbers," he'd laugh, waving his hand like her work was background noise. When friends praised her organization or insight, he smiled and added, "It's nothing big." Laura smiled too, not because she agreed, but because correcting him never felt necessary. In public, Kevin liked to shine. In private, he liked control. He decided where they lived, how money was spent, what was reasonable for her to want. Laura learned that arguing only made him louder, crueler, more certain of his power. So she adapted. She stayed calm. She kept records. She asked questions that sounded harmless and stored answers carefully away. Kevin never noticed. He mistook patience for surrender. He mistook silence for ignorance. And most dangerously, he mistook love for blindness. What Kevin never understood was this: quiet people don't miss details. They collect them. Every transaction, every signature, every time his stories didn't match the numbers. Laura wasn't passive. She was precise. While Kevin believed he was the architect of their success, Laura was the one who knew where every brick was placed and which ones were already cracking. By the time he decided to leave her, convinced she'd walk away with nothing, Laura had already seen the ending he was rushing toward, and she had been watching long enough to know exactly how it would unfold. It didn't happen during a fight. There were no slammed doors, no shattered plates, no dramatic confession shouted across the room. It happened on a rainy Tuesday. Laura remembered the day because everything about it was painfully ordinary. The sky was gray. The house was quiet. Kevin had left early, distracted, his jacket forgotten on the back of the chair. Laura noticed it only because she was cleaning the same way she always did, calmly putting life back into order. She lifted the jacket to hang it properly. That's when the receipt slipped out of the pocket. At first, she didn't even look at it. Habit made her smooth the paper automatically, eyes catching numbers before words. $5,000. Jewelry store. Date: 3 days earlier. Laura stood still. She didn't panic. She didn't gasp. Her heart didn't race the way movies said it should. Instead, something settled. Because before her mind could form questions, the math already didn't make sense. Kevin had told her that week was tight. He'd suggested delaying a bill payment. He'd said bonuses were uncertain this quarter. And yet, $5,000. Clean, confident, spent without hesitation. Later that evening, confirmation came quietly. They were attending a work function. Kevin insisted Laura come, though he barely acknowledged her once they arrived. As usual, he moved ahead, shaking hands, collecting laughter like applause. Laura stayed back, observing faces, conversations, patterns. That's when she saw it. The bracelet, delicate, gold, instantly recognizable. It rested on another woman's wrist as she laughed at something Kevin whispered in her ear. Too close, too familiar. Her hand brushed his arm, casual and practiced. Laura didn't need names. She didn't need explanations. The receipt, the bracelet, the lies, they aligned perfectly. The marriage was over. But here's what surprised even Laura. She didn't feel destroyed. There was sadness, yes, a deep, quiet ache for the years she had invested, the loyalty she had offered freely, the future she once believed in. But there was no chaos, no screaming, No desperate attempt to hold on to something already broken. Instead, she felt clear. Clarity doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives like a light switching on in a dark room you've memorized by touch. That night, Kevin came home late. He spoke too much, explained too little. Laura listened, nodded, asked nothing. He mistook her calm for ignorance, or worse, forgiveness. After he fell asleep, Laura opened her laptop. Because emotions create noise, numbers create clarity, and clarity had always been her strength. She started with the obvious. Bank accounts, credit cards, investment portfolios. She didn't rush. She didn't guess. She verified, cross-checked, tracked patterns that stretched back years. What she found wasn't just infidelity. It was arrogance. Kevin had assumed Laura wouldn't notice small transfers, that she wouldn't question accounts opened for business, that she wouldn't understand shell expenses or delayed deposits. He had underestimated the woman who had balanced their life quietly for over a decade. Every secret left a trail. Laura followed it patiently. There were funds moved just before bonuses hit, assets placed temporarily under relatives' names, debts exaggerated to look burdensome, a careful attempt to appear smaller on paper than in reality. Kevin wasn't just preparing to leave her. He was preparing to erase her. Laura leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. This was the moment everything truly changed, not because of the betrayal, but because of what she realized next. Kevin believed power belonged to the loudest voice in the room. Laura knew power belonged to the one holding the facts. She didn't confront him. She didn't warn him. She didn't let emotion rush ahead of strategy. Instead, she documented everything. Screenshots, statements, timelines, copies stored in multiple places. She consulted professionals quietly, not to seek revenge, but to understand her position with precision. She asked questions the way she always had, calmly, thoroughly, intelligently. And every answer strengthened her resolve. Laura wasn't plotting destruction. She was protecting truth. Weeks passed. Kevin grew bolder, colder, more certain of his coming victory. He began speaking about divorce like a negotiation already settled. "You'll be fine," he said one night, not looking at her. "You don't really need much." Laura smiled softly and nodded. What Kevin never realized was that the moment he believed she was broken, she became unstoppable. Because heartbreak may weaken some people, but for Laura, it sharpened her focus. She didn't want to take everything from him. She wanted fairness. She wanted accountability. She wanted the truth to stand where lies had lived comfortably for too long. And as the rain tapped gently against the windows that night, Laura closed her laptop with a steady hand. The woman Kevin thought he could erase had just finished gathering the evidence that would define the rest of his life. The court date was coming, and for the first time, Laura wasn't afraid of what he might take from her. She knew exactly what he was about to lose. By day, Laura became exactly who Kevin expected her to be. Quiet, agreeable, unthreatening. She went to work, answered messages, nodded during conversations about logistics and fair arrangements. When Kevin spoke about lawyers and timelines, she listened without interruption. When he casually mentioned how divorce didn't have to be ugly, she agreed. He mistook her calm for surrender. By night, Laura followed the money. Not obsessively, not emotionally, methodically. She built spreadsheets the way other people built arguments. Clean columns, clear timelines, notes that connected behavior to consequences. She tracked every transfer that didn't align with income cycles, every expense disguised as business travel, every hotel, dinner, and gift quietly pulled from accounts that were supposed to protect their future. The truth was hidden, but not buried. Kevin had grown careless. Confidence made him sloppy. He assumed Laura didn't understand how finances worked beyond bill paying. He assumed she trusted him blindly. She never had. Some nights, Laura sat in silence for hours, scrolling through statements while the house slept. Other nights, she replayed conversations in her head, matching words to withdrawals. "Oh, this conference was last minute. A flight booked weeks earlier. We're cutting back for a while. A sudden transfer to a personal account. It's nothing serious." a recurring charge with a pattern too precise to be coincidence. Every lie left fingerprints. Laura didn't rush. She didn't chase closure. She didn't allow herself the luxury of emotional release. Not yet. Because anger was tempting. Anger wanted to be loud. Anger wanted to confront, accuse, expose. But anger also destroyed cases. Laura understood something Kevin never had. Winning wasn't about being right. It was about being prepared. She sought advice quietly, not from friends who would feed her rage, but from professionals who understood systems. She learned what mattered in court and what didn't. What could be proven? What needed context? What would collapse under cross-examination? She organized evidence like a story, because truth, presented well, was undeniable. There were moments when the weight nearly broke her. Late nights when exhaustion blurred the screen. Moments when she wanted to scream at him across the dinner table, to throw proof at his face and watch his confidence shatter. Times when grief arrived unexpectedly, triggered by old photos, shared jokes, memories of a version of Kevin that felt like someone else entirely. But Laura reminded herself why she was quiet. Not because she was weak, because she was strategic. Kevin, meanwhile, grew more careless by the day. He began moving money faster, larger amounts, shorter gaps between transfers. He believed the end was near and wanted to secure his advantage. He spoke openly about protecting what's mine, never realizing how those words sounded when documented. He told friends Laura would walk away with a small settlement. He told his lawyer she had no idea how things really work. And Laura wrote it all down. She noted dates, context, witnesses, statements repeated in emails and texts that contradicted sworn declarations he would later make. She wasn't building revenge. She was building a timeline. The power of timelines is simple. They don't argue. They reveal. As weeks turned into months, Laura's fear dissolved into something steadier. Confidence. Not the loud kind Kevin wore. The quiet kind that comes from knowing the ground beneath your feet won't collapse. By the time divorce papers were filed, Laura's preparation was complete. Kevin still believed he controlled the narrative. He still believed she would fold under pressure, overwhelmed by legal language and financial complexity. He had no idea that every document he submitted had already been cross-checked. Every claim measured against bank records he'd forgotten existed. Every attempt to minimize assets already disproven by his own patterns. And when anger could have ruined her case, patience made it unbeatable. Laura walked into court not as a victim begging to be spared, but as a woman carrying facts so solid they didn't need defending. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, because while Kevin had been busy planning how to take everything from her, Laura had been quietly preparing to show exactly where everything had gone. And for the first time since that rainy Tuesday, she felt something close to peace. The storm was coming, and she was ready. Kevin walked into the courthouse like a man arriving for a victory lap. His suit was tailored, his posture relaxed. He smiled at people he recognized, nodded confidently at his lawyer, and barely glanced at Laura. To him, she was already a chapter closed, a quiet woman about to be overwhelmed by a system he believed favored the bold. His lawyer matched his energy. Loud, polished, aggressive, a man who spoke before anyone else could, filling the room with certainty and legal language designed to intimidate. Laura's lawyer was different. Calm, measured, unrushed. He greeted Laura quietly, reviewed a folder one last time, and waited. Because this wasn't a performance. It wasn't about emotion. It wasn't about who sounded more convincing. It was about records. When proceedings began, Kevin's lawyer went first, confident claims delivered with practiced authority. He painted Laura as dependent, uninformed, a spouse who had benefited from Kevin's generosity and now wanted more than she deserved. Kevin sat taller with every sentence. Then Laura's lawyer stood, and the room shifted. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He presented. The first document was simple. A timeline of income versus reported assets. The numbers didn't match. Quiet murmurs filled the courtroom as dates and figures aligned too cleanly to ignore. Next came inheritance records. Kevin had claimed those funds were never shared, never used for the marriage. But statements showed otherwise. Mortgage payments made directly from those accounts. Property taxes covered. Renovations funded. Laura's inheritance hadn't just supported the marriage. It had sustained Kevin's lifestyle. Kevin shifted in his seat. Then came the mortgage. Kevin had insisted he carried the financial burden alone. But the records told a different story. Laura's contributions weren't occasional. They were consistent. Methodical. Essential. Every payment time-stamped. Every claim of sacrifice quietly dismantled. Kevin's lawyer objected. The judge overruled. Then came the affairs. Hotel charges. Jewelry purchases. Travel expenses routed through business accounts. A pattern emerged, undeniable, documented, precise. This wasn't suspicion. This was proof. Kevin stared straight ahead, jaw tightening. When the bracelet receipt appeared on the screen, the same one Laura had found months earlier, the courtroom fell silent. No dramatics followed. They didn't need to be. And then came what Kevin never expected. Gambling. Small at first. Then escalating. Withdrawals timed around losses. Transfers disguised as investments. Money disappearing in increments designed not to attract attention, until it added up to something impossible to explain away. Kevin's lawyer grew quieter. Less confident. His objections shorter. Less frequent. Because every attempt to interrupt only delayed the inevitable. Laura sat still. She didn't smile. She didn't look at Kevin. This wasn't vindication, it was release. The judge asked questions. Precise ones. Questions Kevin struggled to answer without contradicting earlier statements. Each hesitation tightened the noose of truth. When Kevin finally spoke, his voice lacked its usual certainty. This is being taken out of context, he said. But context was exactly what Laura had brought. Page by page. Year by year, the man who had once leaned in and whispered, "I'll take everything from you," now looked smaller with every document presented. His confidence didn't vanish suddenly. It eroded. His posture slouched. His hands fidgeted. The courtroom that once felt like his stage became a place he couldn't escape. And Laura realized something in that moment. She wasn't watching his downfall. She was watching the truth catch up. The judge recessed briefly. When proceedings resumed, the tone was different. The questions sharper. The assumptions gone. Kevin was no longer the authority in the room. He was the subject. By the time closing statements ended, there was nothing left to argue. Only numbers that told a story too consistent to deny. Kevin's lawyer sat back, silent. Laura's lawyer closed his folder. The man who had believed he could take everything was now losing control of everything. Not because Laura had attacked him, but because he had built his life on the assumption that she would never speak. The gavel struck, not loudly, decisively. And in that sound, Laura felt something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. The judge's ruling was clear. There was no dramatic pause, no theatrical delivery, just a steady voice reading decisions shaped by facts that could no longer be ignored. The condo was Laura's, purchased with her inheritance, maintained with her consistency, protected by records Kevin never thought she kept. The losses were Kevin's. Every hidden debt, every gambling withdrawal, every dollar spent feeding secrets he believed would stay buried. The court didn't soften them. It didn't divide them. They belonged exactly where they came from. And the lies, carefully spoken, confidently repeated, were exposed for what they were. Kevin sat motionless as the words landed. The man who once believed silence meant ignorance now understood its real power. Silence hadn't protected him. It had protected her. Outside the courtroom, the air felt different. Lighter. Laura stepped into the hallway without looking back. She didn't wait for apologies or explanations that would arrive too late to matter. Sophie walked past her. There was no confrontation, no satisfaction in watching her leave. Just the quiet understanding that some stories end not with closure, but with distance. And then, weeks later, the final consequence arrived without Laura lifting a finger. Kevin's job disappeared, not because Laura sought revenge, but because truth has a way of traveling. Financial misconduct doesn't stay contained. Employers notice patterns. Audits ask questions. Confidence collapses when credibility does. Laura heard about it secondhand. She felt nothing. No joy. No bitterness. No need to measure herself against a man who no longer defined her life. She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She went home, opened windows that had been shut for years, and let light fill rooms that once held tension. She reorganized without rushing, threw away papers she no longer needed, packed boxes not with fear, but with intention. For the first time, her future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to build. Laura learned something powerful through the wreckage. You don't win by being louder. You don't win by destroying someone else. You win by standing still long enough for the truth to speak. As she locked the door behind her that evening, Laura realized she hadn't lost anything that mattered. She had gained peace. She had gained autonomy. She had gained herself. And somewhere behind her, a man who once promised to take everything was left holding the weight of his own choices. Laura walked forward, lighter, freer, whole. Because sometimes the strongest ending isn't revenge. It's silence, finally rewarded. This was never revenge fueled by anger. It was justice built patiently on truth. Laura didn't win because she shouted louder. She won because she stayed calm longer. While others confused strength with noise, she chose clarity over chaos, facts over fury. Sometimes real power doesn't announce itself. It listens. It waits. It prepares. Because strength can be silent. Because patience can be strategic. And sometimes, the final balance of a life is settled, not with raised voices, but with the quiet certainty that truth, when given time, always finds its way to the surface.